There's a revolution taking place right now. It's going on all around us in places that we work, and a lot of people aren't even aware that it's going on. The revolution I'm referring to is the remote working revolution.
Hi Clay, how you doing?
Hey, how are we doing?
Not bad.
Yeah.
So you and I have been having conversations off camera about what the future of learning and development is, and what the role of learning and development should be right now. And right now is 22nd of March 2020, and I think we're all in a state of shock and awe at the moment. And we've just had our first weekend of living with social distancing in earnest.
And the partial lockdown here in the UK now as well, with the pubs closing, the restaurants closing, schools closing, all those things that are happening. And as you say, it's a new world for us at present.
It is. And one of the things that, you and I have been actively interested in for some time is, what is the future of work? And it seems to me that at this time, suddenly this period of change has been massively condensed, and we're now going through kinds of changes that might have worked out over a decade or more, and they've all happened in a stage of a matter of days. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, I find it. I mean, I think it's, as you said, the shock thing, isn't it? And this fact that come Monday, there'll be a lot of people showing up for work, but they're not going to be getting in their cars and driving into work. They're going to be logging on to MS Teams or Slack or one of these internal social networks to be able to connect with their team or collaborate with their team. So for a lot of people come Monday, it's going to be a different way or a new way of working, one of which they may not necessarily be used to.
So the question is, what's the role of learning and development or continuous learning at this time? And there are a lot of opportunities now. It makes me smile. I included virtual classroom in every proposal I did last year, and nobody took me up on it. But now suddenly every man and his dog is into virtual classroom. It's really interesting, isn't it? I know you've been spending quite a lot of time exploring learning tech because you want to be ready for making that transition.
Yeah, I think for me, in terms of the sort of learning technology, I mean, there's loads of great stuff that's out there. So as a learning professional, it's been, over the last couple of years, it's been a fascinating thing to see where things like LMSs have moved along, things like rapid e-learning tools have moved along. The fact that you can make interactive videos really easily now, again, fascinates me as a learning professional. So part of the transition is, how do we start to use these tools in a learning environment and such a way that, again, that they happen in the workflow of work, which is a term people will probably start to hear. We're not necessarily, we don't need to pull people away from their desk and put them into a big classroom, which we can't do now. So that's forced upon us. But then it's with the tools that we have, we can push the learning out to the learner, and we can also have collaborations in an online space with learners, again, to the point where, apart from physically touching each other, you can replicate that in real life experience through these collaborative tools that we have.
And that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because there's a tendency to associate learning with a classroom experience, and to think then that if we can't have that classroom experience, that the learning is going to be compromised. And now, I don't know about you, but I think there's an opportunity for the learning to get better at this stage. I think people are going to be integrating learning into their day-to-day lives much more closely, and then practicing what they learn much more immediately, instead of going on a course and thinking it's all over.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've seen the curve in terms of, you go into a course and you learn and you forget most of it by the time you got back down to your desk or got back to the office. And so a lot of where we're moving now into the future is, how do we almost like I was a manufacturer back in the day, and you would have heard the sort of the just in time. So it's almost like just in time learning now, isn't it? So when I need to know that thing, is there a place that I can go that I can grab a piece of micro learning? Again, I know we're throwing out a lot of terms, but that's, there's a piece of micro content that I can consume that shows me how to do what I need to do. I mean, if we just, how do we learn most things these days? I know how I learn. I want to know something, straight into either Google search if I'm wanting to, find the different mediums that are out there on the topic, or straight to YouTube if I want to see if someone's made a video on how to do this thing. I'm straight there. And then I learn that discrete thing, and then I'm off again. So it's like, how do we harness that in the workplace for, and I guess the challenge on that, and this is interesting, I was just thinking this now, the challenge for that, because that's a very individualistic thing as a learner. How do companies gear themselves up for the various different roles in the company, that I can go onto our LMS or our internal SharePoint system and find what I want that helps me to do my role within the organization? And so L&D, how are we going to make sure there's enough content for everybody in the business to be able to have that kind of experience?
Yeah, an LMS, learning management system, that's a store, right? That's a place to store and record what learning's happening.
That'll be the learning record store for the storing of that knowledge. The learning management system, which I think is probably more, people will be more familiar with that term because it's been around for a long time. And in terms of, it's usually been associated in the past with the compliance thing. So I need to see that all my people have done health and safety, GDPR, and the newer piece of technology is the learning record store, which actually records a lot more than just, did this person pass a quiz? If you have the sort of learning record store and it's X API, then I can see where you clicked and how long you spent on something. I can get a lot more data points with the newer systems than perhaps I could have done with a traditional LMS. And so basically, actually, I mean, what you're getting to is a place that I can go online and I can find courses that I could take, or I can find some piece of social learning or some content that I can interact with others in terms of facilitating my learning experience.
So then we're giving the learner the authority and the capacity to go out and find their own learning, to meet what they know to be their own learning needs. And that's a really interesting conversation, isn't it, around how do we as organizations shape that? How do we track it? And gain data on it, but also how do we make sure that actually, broadly speaking, that we're learning similar messages and we're getting to similar outcomes that serve business need? And that's really going to be one of the roles of L&D, I think, isn't it? It's going to be to see where the learning is really happening and how that's serving business need.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's seeing where it's happening, being able to track these data. So if you do have a system that allows you to track how people are interacting with the software and things like where they spend their time at, and getting data. I think the other role of L&D is almost shifting into the curator space as well, as in there's so much, I've alluded to, I go onto Google and find that there's so much material that's out there on the internet. There's loads. So in some cases you can look, if I have a decision to make, I can take time out, take 3 to 4 months to build a e-learning piece, let's say. And I know you can have shorter cycles than that, but if you want to do something that's really good, I can take the time to build this and then deploy it. And then it's already out of date probably by the time I deploy it. Or one of the things I think L&D professionals have to get better at, especially if you're internal, is how do I find information, sift through the information, make sense of the information, and then parse it out and put it into a space where my learners can find, because this video would be relevant to this population of people to see. You know, if you're finding a piece, a new TED Talk that's on a topic of leadership that's pertinent to your audience, you know, how do I push that out to and let people know that it's there, that they can go, they can consume that piece of content and get some learning from it.
And then there will be times when we want to actually sort of scaffold, if you like, create frameworks for people to follow, to navigate their way through some of that content, so that we know that we're exposing them, possibly through whatever means they choose, but by saying, look, we need you to address this question, we need you to improve capability in this respect, and here are your choices around how to do that learning.
Yeah, and I think that's where we bring in our facilitation skills, and you know, we talk about in the traditional classroom, if we're talking in the online space and we're looking at, well, how do we create a learning experience from end to end? We need them to be able to learn this or do this or have this kind of knowledge. What's the experience to that? Some of it might be pointing them towards a video, it might, or a podcast or a series of podcasts, some articles to read. As you said, that, you know, here's questions that I want you to think about this material as you're kind of learning what you need to learn from it. How do I then share that with others who are going through the process at the same time, so that we can take advantage of the social learning aspect, just as we would do in a traditional classroom, where we're sharing our respective knowledge to each other, and we can do that in a digital way as well. So for us as L&D professionals, it'll be, how do I shape that journey? You know, you come to me and say, you know, we want to, you know, have an experience that is, you know, dealing with the leadership principles, for instance. You know, one avenue would be, okay, well, let's get you all in the classroom and I'll create some slides and I'll do the sage on the stage approach and teach you the leadership principles. Or we could flip this around, and where we're finding ourselves at now is, all right, well, let's create a journey for these learners that are going to go through. And, you know, just like, so this is different. I think maybe this is important to make a distinction between online learning and e-learning, as in e-learning being, well, all of it is electronic learning. So I don't want to get tied up in semantic, but when you think about e-learning, traditional e-learning, it's something that I interact with, self-paced, basically. Here's a video or a piece of e-learning that someone's created, and it's self-paced, and I go through it, do some quizzes, and done. Online learning, as in I'm coming online to either look at a piece of e-learning or a standalone video or a podcast, or participate in a group forum, or, and there's a lot of ors that we can string in there when we talk about the online learning place. There's a lot of different tools that we might come online that we might use. Some of them will be in real time. Some of them might be in your own time, but you have a definite target date that you have to have the thing done by. But it just gets facilitated online. So I think that's important to draw that
Absolutely,
kind of distinction.
And I think there's a perception sometimes that learning delivered digitally is dry, or is click through, tends to be associated with compliance learning, for example, a certain amount of information that has to be absorbed. But actually, it can be a really rich experience. It can be experiential. It can be collaborative. It can be a lot of things that face-to-face learning has delivered in the past, but we can replicate that. It will look slightly different, it will be designed slightly differently, but it can be done with real flair and real impact. Yeah,
so we can make it engaging and impactful, and that someone actually learns something from it as well, isn't it? So there was never any guarantee that if you put everybody in a room and stood somebody up at the front, that people were going to learn anything. So that's never been the guarantee. So it's always been about how you design it, isn't it?
And the holy grail is practice in the workplace. So we need that learning to shift from the classroom into the workplace. Well, now we've got a great opportunity sadly at a very high cost, but we've got a great opportunity to drive that change through.
Yeah, I think, well,
And
now we don't have I mean, at this present moment we're now finding ourselves in a, while all, there's been, there's companies that are in various different spaces with their online learning and e-learning aspect. Now we're suddenly in the position where I don't have much of a choice now, because, we're
yeah,
social
this is it. We're in this space.
distancing and that, and we're in this sort of space. So now we're finding ourselves in this where we have to make it happen. So we can't
Yeah.
stop, giving development and learning support to a workforce now that they're remote
No,
working.
quite the reverse, actually. This is a time when we absolutely have to be sharing learning as a form of engagement and showing people that they're still valued and helping them see that there is a future, and equipping them to deal with it and be part of it. I think that's absolutely vital.
Great. And I think one of the things that we should do with this series is maybe, I know we kind of talked kind of conceptually at the sort of bigger picture at this, but one of the things I'd like to see with this series that we could offer out to people is to be able to get specific about different tools.
Sure.
For instance, how we might use this particular tool in this kind of way to collaborate and the likes. I think that would be very valuable.
Well, let's do it next.
I'm all right with that. Very good.
Okay, Kay.
Yes.